So, Captain Morgan, Skywagon, got to put a foot on a tire. This is Mark from Skywagon University, and we're going to look at, it's not going to be a comparison between the two because we've got two different planes and very different performance. We're going to have a 1952 170B, and I'll tell you all about the B-ness of the B, and then a 1953 Cessna 180, so 1 year newer. So it's like lost in the 50s. We'll go over the differences and the benefits of each and the year models of each, and just a kind of overview of them both without them competing against each other, because obviously that would win in every realm other than price. But there's a huge amount of benefits to a 170. It was my first plane, so let's have a close look at those. So a little overview of each before we get into them in detail. 170s, so aeroplane taking off. 170s were built from 48 to 56, and the 48s were double strutted, fabric covered wings, small flaps, and then the 170A was a metal wing single strut, but it was also flat top wing, small flaps, and they came until 51. And then in 52 the B model came out, and it's basically this plane. This is a 52B, and it's 52Bs go until 52, no, the B model goes to 56. And the only difference in that year run, apart from some very minor things visibly, is the 54 5s and 6s have a kind of more squared off window here, but it's pretty much exactly like this. But they have the big Fowler flaps, the Bs, they have a little bit of dihedral, and they're the ones everybody seems to want. So that's the overview of 170s, and I'll go into engines and dimensions and specs in a minute. So on the 180, this is a 53, that's a 52, this is a 53. Sorry, it isn't, it's a 54. Okay, this is a 54. 53s have no baggage door, this has a baggage door. So this is a 54, so it's 2 years newer than the 170. And I'm only going to talk about early planes for this, when we're in this, because there were 3-window airframes after 63, and then they get newer and newer until 81. 180s were built from 53 to 81, and these early planes with the single rear window behind the door and the slightly lowered roof line, they were 53 to 59. 60 to 63 is a little bit different. So let's just think to 59, early plane. So they had a much longer production run. They ended in 81, they ended in 56. So let's see the similarities of them, and also their nose wheel equivalent. So say the nose wheel equivalent of that is a 172. So the 172 came out, that came out in 1948, and the 172 came out with the nose wheel and the 0300 in 56, the safer version with the training wheel on the front. The 180s, that plane with a nose wheel is the 182. So that came out in 53, and the 182 came out in 56. Tall gear legs, long nose wheel, exactly the same plane. It's manual flaps, trimmable tail, 470 engine, everything was the same in it. And there was actually a kit in 56 from Cessna you could buy that gave you the nose wheel conversion to make your dangerous, scary, tail dragging 180 into a safe nose wheel plane. And some people did it. And those planes have survived to today unknown to be 180s until somebody finds one in a barn and runs its serial number and goes, oh my god, it's a nose wheel 180, and then converts it back and doubles its price. Well, not doubles its price anymore because the 182s have gone crazy. But that is identical to a 182 with a straight tail and the jack screw in it up until right up until 1960 cut. I'll pose right here while I get this shit right. 50, what did it do? 59. Yes, so the 182s are identical to this plane right up until 59. So if you wanted a nose wheel or tail wheel, it's 180, 182. Nose wheel or tail wheel, it's 170, 172. And then not really the same plane, but you could argue it, 206, 185. The big brother of them both has the nose wheel in the 206, tail wheel in the 185, 520 engine. Very different airframe in the 206 though. But let's stick to these two now. We've given an overview of what their year production runs were. So interestingly on both of them, they hit you right in the head at exactly the same place. So it's the same height, it's a mid forehead on the flaps. So you'd think this would be lower, but it isn't. The doors, 3 feet. This door would fit on that plane. Exactly the same. And then you think, ooh, this must be smaller. Well, it isn't. It's 38 inches across from the doorpost there to the doorpost there in this, and it's 38 inches doorpost to doorpost in that. And that's not because these always stayed the same, and these became the early 172. Those are always the same through all the 180s and all the 185s ever made. An 85 185 is that width. Same as this 170, same as the 172. The only plane that widened in 62 they widened, was a 182. Rear window in a 182, wide fuselage. These stayed at 38 inches from here to there all years of 180 and 185. So incredibly similar feel inside. If you want to learn to fly one of those, or a 185, this could not be the better trainer. These are absolutely docile and predictable, and I'm going to fly it later and see if I get away with it and back that up. But I had one of these. My first plane I ever had was a 52 170B, and it was I did 350 hours in it, and it was absolutely fantastic. On the 180, bam, middle of the forehead, exactly the same height, same 3-foot door, same latch, same width, 38 inches across the cabin. It is a little bit taller, and the top of the cowling is a bit higher in a 180. And in fact, while we're looking at both of them from the side, I want to show you something. See how the nose of a 180 points straight up in line with the fuselage. It carries on up and then it rolls over a little bit at the front. The forward visibility in that is as good as it can be for a big tail dragger. But from here, look at the 170. Just long distance, it's actually it's not even parallel with the ground, it's lower. We'll sit in it with cameras on and show you the forward visibility. That you can see as much of the ground in front of you as in a 172. That's another reason that they're great trainers. Okay, on the engines, I don't even need my handy Leatherman to open this, watch. A little bit over center, and then carefully lie it back. And here's the business end. So all 170s have this engine or a slight variation from it. This is a Continental 0300. It can be an 0300 or a C145. They're 145 horsepower, 6-cylinder, carbureted, air-cooled. And remember, O opposed, 300 cubic inches, 145 horsepower. Same as in the one, this was in all the 170s, and it was in 172s from new until 67 inclusive. 68 172s get the Lycoming. But really easy access. You've got a giant oil filler neck hole here. You've got the dipstick right here. Very, very easy access. And this little inner cowling, if you undo these two and just take it off, there's the top spark plug, cylinders, very accessible. And if it was like that, there's an 0200. That's a 150 engine at 96 horsepower. So there's an 0200, there's an 0300. So very common and available, and actually very smooth running. And then always make sure that these don't just shut it like that. You've got to lift it over the two little spikes and close it. And you'll see 170s with pins in them. You do not want that opening in flight. It's a pain. You've got to side slip it and stop it slamming, and you got to, but that happened to me. So very, very easy access. 0300 Continental, 1800 hour TBO. Now the 180. So before we go to the 180, I remembered something. I wanted to talk about the different engine options you can put in them, the favorite upgrades. So the 0300 is standard. You can put in, a very popular one is a Lycoming 0360 4-cylinder 180 horsepower with a constant speed prop, which is basically the front of a Mooney M20C. 2-blade, constant speed, 180 horsepower, carbureted, 360 cubic inch. That makes a very fun plane out of a 170. It goes from 145 to 180 horse. You can also put in an IO360 Continental, which is a 6-cylinder engine, which lives normally in a Hawk XP. So it's injected, it's 6 cylinders, it's 195 horsepower or 210 horsepower, depending on whether it revs to 26 or 2800 RPM. So the IO360, and you think, oh, big, heavy. This is a 6-cylinder engine. The IO360 Continental is a 6-cylinder engine, so it isn't that much worse. The prop's heavier. Then the other one, a little bit rarer, is the Franklins can go in here. 165 and 220 horse Franklins. I've seen those in there too. So there's a few options, but the big common one is the Lycoming 360, because it's 2000 TBO and it's 35 more horsepower. Now let's look at the 180. The Cessna 180, the engine in this, all 180s have Continental 6-cylinder 470s in them at 225 early to 230 horse, all the way through to the end of production in 81. Carbureted 6-cylinder, 1500 hour TBO, except for some of the U engines, which are 77 to 81. Those are some of them, not all. Everybody thinks U engines are all 2000 hour. They're not. Other videos go over that. The U engines can be 1500 or 2000, but just think of a 180 as a 1500 hour TBO. I'm not going to take its cowling off because I haven't got an hour and a half spare to undo all the screws. It's a pain. But they do have this giant oil access door, and you don't need your Leatherman to open it. And you can see a little bit in there. Much bigger, 230 horsepower, and all the mags and engine heaters and things in there. 1500 hour TBO. Now the options for these are like Harley Davidsons. There's a million things you can do, and there's no two the same. This is an 0470A, and everyone's like, ooh, the rhyme. Okay, the rhyme is if it's an A, walk away. If it's a J, it's okay, because the A is in 53, and some are 54, and then there's the J engine in the 54s, and then you get into the KRSs, which will go right up to 76, and the U beyond that. But the A isn't a bad engine. It can't be that bad. There's one in this 54 and it's running very, very nicely. The only problem is there isn't a core exchange program with Continental, and some people have already put in R's and S's and K's and L engines in them to replace them, and it's a really easy change. So that's still a 470 though. It's a 470 being changed to a more modern 470. If you want more balls and horsepower, you put a carbureted 520 in it, and even more than that, that's 270 horse. Even more than that, inject that, and it's a 185 engine, so it's 300 horsepower, 2800 RPM. That would be an IO 520, so you're going 470, 520 cubic inch injected. Injecting a carbureted plane like this is a big deal because it doesn't have the header tanks and the fuel pumps and all the different things it needs, so that's a big deal, injecting them. And the other thing you can put in is a 550, which is a 520 with a longer stroke, so it's no bigger, it's just got more cubic inches in it. And that makes these into a monster. But you got to be careful because the more fuel you need, these only have 55 gallons of gas. The later 180s have 74 gallons of gas. So this is a light, nimble, no counterweight in the tail. I'll show you that. Beautiful feeling flying plane, which really benefits from a big engine. But you got to add fuel to it if you're going to go a long way. So the main engines in a nutshell are 470, 520, carbureted injected, 550, crazy. And they go in here. So let's close this up and look at some more things. So we're talking about why do the early 180s fly lightly? They feel very nimble and light, and the later planes feel heavier. Well, the later planes are 185s with small engines, but apart from that, the elevator in a two-window 180 does not have a downspring in it. So if I do that and let go, it stays there. If I'd done that on a three-window 180, you know, anything from like 63 to 81, I would have lifted it, let go, and it would have just clonked back on its own. So it's got a downspring to it. And it just gives it a little bit more of a kind of solid, heavy feel. And it's not bad, it's just it makes these light. So this is closer in feel than flying to a 170 is. It's closer to being a 170 than it is to its big brother, the 180 or the 185. That's why people like these, because they're a cross between the two. The 170 is just like this, except it's not, you know, it never got a heavy downspring. And then obviously if you just step this way a little bit and get both tails in, that's a pretty tail. That is very similar to the 195, very similar to the Bird Dog, round and everything. That only was on the 170, not the 172. The 172, when it came out in 56, was square everywhere. So that's just a very conventional tail. This has the jack screw that trims it up and down, so the entire leading edge of the horizontal moves like this, pivoting here, and there's an AD on that. Whereas on the 170, there's a trim tab, little trim tab on the wheel, so it is not as forgiving at carrying weight badly as this is, because it's got massive range in its trim, and that's more delicate. But you wouldn't want to load that up too much anyway, because the useful loads on them, 180s are all around, you know, 1,000, maybe just under, just over, depending on things. Those are like 800. They're more like a 172, so they're not really up for the big hauling a dead moose out of a short strip in Montana like these. Gear legs. The 180s, obviously the 170 is lighter and smaller, lighter weight plane, so it's got thinner gear legs. The 180s, we'll look at that in a minute. The 180s have 600 thousandths, so 0.6 of an inch, 650, and then 750 as they get newer, and in the end they become the same as the 185, which is 750 thousandths, which is 3/4 of an inch thick spring steel gear legs. And if I were to rock it, there's not a lot of give. So you can see the thickness I'm talking about is here, and this one will be 0.6 of an inch. So that's standard for this. In that hole where that goes in, you can put early gear leg, late gear leg, 185 gear leg, 180 gear leg, all of them. And if you want the strongest and most durable but the hardest to land, you put in the 185 gear leg because it's rigid. It's much thicker, it's 750 thousandths. But if you've got big tires on it and you're doing backcountry work, that's probably the best bet. So let's go and look at the 170. Okay, the 170's gear legs are thinner, and see how they bow? They're like whoop. If you saw that bow on a 180 or 185, you'd be taking them off and having them resprung. That's normal. That's called the lady legs, and they're very, very springy. So if I do the same thing I did on the 180, look how much give they have. So that actually makes it a little bit more forgiving when you're landing, even with small tires, because you've got a lot of flex. But it means, obviously, you can't abuse it and you can't overload it, because if you pull them backwards, they splay if the alignment's not correct, and if you land them hard, they splay. So that's the 170 factory gear leg. Now if this was a 180 horsepower or it had a Franklin in it or something, you could put in 180 gear legs in a 170. You could put even 185 gear legs in a 170, but that's factory, and they always bow out, whereas on the 180 you'll see them come down almost flat and then almost bow in a bit, unless of course it's had a hard life and they're a bit not straight. And then you adjust them. Say you see a plane sitting on the ramp not level, it could be fuel load, but if everything's exact and it's not level, where the gear legs go into the fuselage there are shims, and you just take the weight off it, put a different shim in, put it back, and a shim like that will lift the wingtip like 3 inches. So it's significant. You've got to set them up right. But that's the gear legs on them. Baggage doors, 170s from the factory never had a baggage door. The way you access, there is baggage, it's the same. It's this area here, behind the seat's here. So that baggage area is still in there, but you access it over the back seat. You pull the seat back forward, you put your stuff in. There isn't a baggage door, but the structure of the fuselage here is identical to that. And so you could put one in, and I've seen 170s with baggage doors been added after the fact with factory frame, factory knob. In fact, on that really beautiful red 180 horsepower Cessna 170 that's on this channel as well, I did a video on it on its own. It has a baggage door that was put in. So let's have a quick look at the 180 and we'll see the difference. Okay, so here we are at the 180, and just since we're in the area, this window, this is the shape of the late 170s rear window. It's that shape until 53, 54, 55 and 56 is this shape. So that's just a thing. But we're talking about baggage doors. So there's the baggage door. Oh my God, no knob. What do we do? So the way these early ones open is there's a button inside the door. So if the door's locked, you can't get to the button, so you can't open the baggage door until you press this button hard, and it opens with no latch. So there's the baggage door. And if you were putting this into the 170 structurally for like in a restoration, you get the frame from Cessna, you get the door from the junkyard, and you put it all together and you got a baggage door. But that's 53s didn't have that in 180s. 54s and newer have it. So if you see a 180 without a baggage door, it's always a 53, and it just shuts like that. And the release is there. An amusing feature this particular plane has is what the owner calls the Canadian door steward. A bit of elastic dangling from the strut. Here's how it works. Window open, door open, bungee through the door handle, bam. How can you beat that? And they just trail in flight. So wings, they're the same. Differences are fuel capacity and aileron counterweights, things like that. But the wing, basically, it's 36 feet wide. It has the big Fowler flaps, the same ailerons, So, and the 1.5 degrees of dihedral. See how there's a little bit of dihedral. Dihedral, if you're not understanding, if you're not watching from like an English-speaking country, dihedral is the raise of the wing from the fuselage. The 170As were flat, so if you flip one over, it didn't hurt it. But the dihedral gives it stability in the air, and they added that in the B model. So 1.5 degrees of dihedral, exact same aileron, exact same flap, 40 degrees, manual, everything the same. This has 55 gallons, that has 37 gallons, so there's a difference in the fuel bay. And also, same aileron, but a heavier plane going at a higher speed. So they have different counterweights. So if you move the aileron in any Cessna and look up inside here, there are counterweights riveted from here to here, here to here to here. So a 185 will be like this, 180, 182, 170, 180. So this has 4 lead counterweights riveted to its aileron for balance. And I looked over there on the 170 and it has 2. It's going slower, it isn't as heavy, it's less likely to flutter for various other aerodynamic reasons. So if you were to interchange the flaps, they'd be identical. If you interchange the ailerons, you've got to put the counterweights on to match. And that applies to most Cessnas with the forehead cutting diamonds on it. They're all the same. So that's a lot of the similarities and differences between the two. We're going to fly them both, but I'm not going to race them and climb them and outperform them and short field them, because they're completely different planes. It would be like making a 172 compete with a 182.